open it up to you. What do we know about the factors affecting young people's health outcomes?
They start early. They talked about Jasmine in first grade. Let's talk about Jasmine at 6 months. Even by that point, there's a difference in what's going to happen to Jasmine's education opportunities and her ability to excel in them. Take a really interesting fact. A child born into scenario 1 with more affluent parents will hear 3 times the number of words, just the volume of words, and 2 times the type of words, more actual vocabulary words. And this will affect their language acquisition and their readiness from school beginning at 6 months. Then the same Jasmine born into a family that has less income and less education. And so we're talking at the earliest stages, these differences start a divergent path into very different outcomes that interact.
And are we already seeing different health outcomes that, not just the beginning of the path, but actual health outcomes that are different? I'm reading a statistic, African-American children 3 times more likely not to make it to their first birthday.
Yes, we're seeing those disparities here in St. Louis, both St. Louis City and St. Louis County. African-American infant mortality 3 times the rate. And that was one of those indicators that we found historically. Though overall, infant mortality has dropped, and we want to see that line go down and to the right, but the gap between African Americans and whites remains.
So it's getting better, but not for everyone.
Right. Well, definitely not for everyone. And put it on another plane. The United States is number 47 in the world. We already have an abysmal infant mortality rate. When you take and add on top of it the multiplier of what our neighbors are experiencing in mortality rate, you've got outcomes that wouldn't be accepted in any third world country. This is serious, those health outcomes. And we look at the top 3 reasons why it's happening. We look at low birth weight. We look at pregnancy events. And we look at SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. These are number 3 top reasons why we have mortality at such a young age. And you can look right away then, start digging underneath those. We start seeing, why could that be? Do I have access to health care? Do I have access to healthy food? Am I sure that when I get to health care, I'm going to be treated well and with respect? I mean, there's a lot of reasons why one would see this happening.
Well, and one of the scary things that we report on is even education in this instance isn't protective for African-American mothers. African-American mothers with college education have worse birth outcomes in terms of low birth weight than white mothers without high school education. And part of that, you talk about 6 months, one of the hypotheses for that is that in utero, the stress that mothers are feeling as a result of discrimination, as a result of just everyday hassles having to do with race and discrimination, are changing, rewiring the stress response of children in utero.
So what can be done if the problem starts this early?
Well, to me, I think the most interesting thing that this report brings to light is that it does couple environmental factors with education and how children learn. And a lot of our ed reform movements are focused specifically on testing, on sole measures of quality, and we forget to think about these factors, these health disparity factors that influence how children learn. And so to me, if we want a bold education reform movement, we have to think about the community as much as we think about schooling. We've got to push both of those together. Today, in our current environment, all we think about is just education and isolate it from the environment, and this report brings that clearly to light, that they're both important, that is what a bold reform looks like, is investments in community and investments in education at the same time.
So education, so teachers and doctors aren't that far apart in their profession.
Well, we have said in this project that education is a health intervention. And what we're seeing nationally is that life expectancy, the gap between those who have some college or more and high school or less, is actually widening, and it's been widening for decades. That means that life expectancy for someone who's got high school or less hasn't budged, while those who have college or more are gaining 1.5 years to 2 years of life expectancy.
The report does a great job of defining the problem, but it also talks about some solutions as well. Let's take a look. We can represent this visually on the screen as well. Let's talk about specifically when we're talking about early life and education. Talk about some of the recommendations that are in this report right now. We're talking about quality of early childhood development,
right, et
cetera.
The first recommendation is high quality early childhood programming for all children. And I like to say that the jury is in on this. There are reams and reams of studies and reports that tell us how important those early years are. And not just how important they are, because what we wanted to do in this report was not just make the moral case and not just make the aha case, but also make the economic case. You can see a return of anywhere from $7 to $17 for every dollar spent on early childhood.
Okay, how should we spend those dollars on school health programs? What do you mean by a school health program?
The CDC has a model for coordinated school health, and very often schools will have some of these elements. They'll have the school nurse, they'll have the nutrition program, they may have a wellness program for the faculty and staff, but those things aren't integrated and they don't talk to each other. And one of the examples, because throughout this work we're highlighting examples that are already happening here in St. Louis, is a clinic that's being run by Mercy at Roosevelt High School and being funded by the Boeing Company, where the clinic is actually housed at Roosevelt High School, and students are developing a rapport with that medical staff and are able to get their needs taken care of right there at school, where they spend most of their an
Is that an ROI that Boeing sees right there, a return on investment?
I think Boeing is thinking about this in the long term in terms of having both an educated and a healthy workforce for the future. And that's how we need to be thinking about it as a region.
Back up for 1 second. If the jury is in on quality early childhood development, how do we get there? Why are we not doing that? If the jury's in, where's the action?
Well, where the jury is out is on how well communities come together to make this happen. You know, what I get to spend most of my time on is with community coalitions and partnerships. And we work with them across the country. And we have seen over and over again the ability of multi-stakeholder groups, business, hospitals, healthcare, education, concerned parents, nonprofits coming together. And they are actually increasing access and the quality of early childhood care environments across the board. They are increasing or changing immunization rates. You can go across the board. And so actually there's a lot of power in some very traditional forms of community organizing. And so I think the onus is on us. There's a lot that's known to be done. There's not a lot of research to be done. We know both where we stand, which is not acceptable, and many of the solutions that can get us to much better progress for our neighbors. The gap is not in what we need to know, it's what we need to do, and it's organizing across those sectors. Because I'd argue one more thing that Alex, the point he was making, it's about being child-centered, not issue-centered. When we pick an issue at a time, today I'm concerned about this health outcome, and the other day I'm concerned about another health outcome. We totally lose perspective, and we end up with these siloed responses, right, in separate systems, instead of just paying attention to the child and the family. Put them at the middle. Think of them holistically. Bring the partners around from that point of view. It calls for a slightly different kind of planning. It calls sometimes for people at the table who aren't used to being at the table together. But when they do, we see in communities across the country powerful, amazing responses in outcomes and in the satisfaction that comes from building community. It's a reward unto itself.
Right. We have a lot of research on community schools. We have over 1,000 community schools in the country. And these community schools are doing these wraparound services that are improving health outcomes, that are improving education outcomes, that are improving community trust. So yeah, that research is there, and it's just the impetus is on us as a community to demand that is what gets done.